Hello, my name is Dr. Laura, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I co-own a group practice, and my passion is working with people who have experienced abuse and neglect in childhood and have developed trauma disorders as adults, whether that's complex PTSD or dissociative disorders. I have been doing this for a good 20 years now, and I have learned so much, both from other professionals, but also from each and every one of my clients. And as I am nearing the middle of my career, I am thinking that I would really love to share some thoughts with all of you about some of the things I've learned and some of my observations. And I'm also open to hearing your thoughts and observations, whether you are also a clinician working with clients, or whether this is personal, whether this applies to your life or people you know, or maybe even both. So, yeah, enjoy and let me know what you think. Welcome to the Impact of Abuse and Neglect on Narcissistic Family Systems, Part 8. This is the final part of this series. They will be primarily focused on submission defenses. I will explain what that is. The doll that next to me is a doll, a neuropeep. I'll put that in the credits what those are, in a position, in a submissive position. I'm going to say a bit about how all of this relates to dissociative identity disorder. Much more could be said, but I'm going to say a little bit, and then I'm going to share some final reflections with you. So submission defenses are the defenses of last resort. If a child can do anything else other than do a submission response, they will. And submission responses can be conscious and voluntary, or they can be involuntary. And I'm going to talk about both. So starting early in life, kids learn in these kind of families that voluntarily, so this is a voluntary submission response, voluntarily choosing to go along with what the parent is asking you to do or agreeing with them, going along with what they ask, generates less anger than actively resisting the parent. A submissive response may even please the parent, so it may also be a fawning response, allowing the child to get some attachment needs met and some needs for attention and value. So a child may also learn to voluntarily submit because they know the abuse is coming, and if they submit to it, then afterwards things get better. A child may also learn to voluntarily submit in order to spare someone else in the family. So if a child knows that the abusive parent or one of the abusive parents is going to go after the other parent or after a sibling, they may do something to act out to get that the parent who is going to abuse someone, to get the attention focused on them in order to spare a family member. And those stories like kill me when I hear them. Like, I've had a number of clients who've shared those kinds of stories about what they're willing to endure for the sake of a parent or a sibling, especially a sibling, and that is a real thing, and kids will do that young. Some kids will. Some kids will learn to do that young. And when I say voluntary, I mean, it's not voluntary in the sense that, like, this is an ideal way to respond, but it's voluntary in that it is a conscious decision. So we need to talk about involuntary submission responses because these are very significant, especially with more severe narcissistic abuse and neglect. And it starts in infancy, actually, when the child is a baby. Many parents believe, and I always feel so sad disabusing parents that have kids in an abusive situation of this knowledge. However, infants, babies do respond very negatively to abuse. And sometimes the parent or both parents are like relieved, like, oh, we're screaming at each other, or there's this violence and the baby's sleeping, thank goodness. But, and to some degree, yes, it is good the baby's sleeping, but falling asleep is actually an involuntary submission response. And it is far more natural for a baby to cry out in distress as soon as parents start yelling at each other or as soon as there's violence. If the baby is sleeping instead, they have already learned at an extremely young age that crying will not help and will make it worse. Or they are so overloaded by the intensity of the stimuli of the screaming or the violence that sleep happens automatically. But sleep is an involuntary submission response if you are a stressed sleeper. This one does carry into adulthood as well. So as the child gets older, there's basically three options for involuntary submission defenses. The first is freeze, and when I say older, I mean toddlers to some extent, right? And certainly as we get closer to preschool and elementary school. So the involuntary responses are freeze, tonic immobility, and collapsed immobility. So I'll explain what each of those are. The little doll with the wide open eyes, and again, little neuropeep, is in a state of freeze, and you can see there's the wide open eyes, there's the terror, there's the hands at the side and not moving. So in a freeze state, if I'm in a freeze state, I'm able to have some, maybe a little bit of control over my speech or whether I can move, but I'm unable to do what the situation demands. And if you think about what a freeze response is in nature, that's the moment where a rabbit doesn't move because they are not, they're in between. Do I hide? Do I get away? Do I run? It's the decision moment. Well, in an abuse situation, there's often not a correct response. And so the child doesn't move because they're paralyzed by conflicting impulses. This can happen with attachment too, that there's part of the child that wants to approach the parent and part of the child that wants to run. And those result, and that's when you see freeze actually, and pretty well, in babies, is the child will literally get paralyzed by fear and will be unable to move forward sometimes despite wanting to move forward. In adulthood, this one combines with some of the other defenses. So we talked early on about perfectionism as a fawning defense. So if I need to be perfect, and let's say I'm a student, so I need to be perfect at my paper. So what I really need to do is to study. However, if I maybe have so much terror about even attempting to do it because I'm sure I'm going to fail it or I'm going to make a mistake or I'm not going to be able to do it correctly. And so the freeze response is I have to do it, but I'm going to fail. And again, remember with narcissistic abuse and neglect, failure is not just, oh, I'm going to beat myself up a little bit. I'm like, oh, geez, I shouldn't have made the mistake. No, like failure is like early flashback state of catastrophic shame, humiliation, disintegration. And so like that fear of failure is extremely powerful and therefore can really paralyze people and put them in a freeze state. I mean, I've worked with clients that are unable to do very simple things that they are capable of doing because of that fear of not doing them perfectly or that fear of making a mistake. If as in childhood you learn that those mistakes are disastrous, or you have, especially if you have a parent that constantly finds fault and doesn't see any value in what you're doing, this can lead to an adulthood where the person is constantly in a freeze state or gets in them frequently and cannot move forward in life, or it's extremely difficult. The next involuntary submission response is talked about, well, most often in the context of sexual assault. And this is, but it applies to all different forms of abuse. And that's tonic immobility. And tonic immobility is a combination of that freeze and submission. So what it holds on to from the freeze is that there's acute fear. And I'm not in a, well, in neither freeze or tonic immobility, any anger I had is long gone because the threat feels bigger than I am. So there's still the fear, but I'm in an involuntary submission state, meaning I'm unable to physically move. And this is matters of degree. I have seen clients in my office in all stages of this continuum, between like, okay, I'm slowing down, but I can kind of move. slowly to, okay, I can flutter my eyes and nothing else, to I can't do anything, to I can wiggle my toes but nothing else. Again, there's a range. And in that state, if you're in that state, you're aware of everything that's happening around you, but you can't respond to anything verbally or physically. Um, and I've also, this state is a problem in a number of respects. One thing that's happened to a few of my clients is getting inadequate medical care because they feel threatened, let's say in the ER or the doctor's office, or they're stuck in that state. They think it's a physical state, so they go to the ER. However, that place is not a place that makes them feel safer. People are asking you questions, people are asking you to take off clothing, to put a gown on, people are wanting to poke you with things. And so the lack of safety in the environment makes that tonic immobility worse. And moreover, and I've had clients be viewed as, they get drug screenings when they're in this state in the hospital, for example, because the person thinks they're intoxicated, that's why they're not moving. Um, or if a child's in this state, and you have an authoritarian parent, it's like, speak to me, look at me when I'm talking, speak to me, and they may not be able to do it. So that's also worth looking at. If, let's say you work with kids and you have a kid that sometimes selective mutism is on the continuum with this. It's like a wanting to act, wanting to speak, wanting to do something, but instead your body's shutting down. And in this state, it is, you may also lose bladder or bowel control. So as these are very traumatic experiences when people have gone through them. All the more because what's on the outside is so different from what's on the inside. But in childhood, again, if there's a lot of abuse and neglect, and if there is not that safe attachment figure, you cannot share what's in the inside on the outside. And so collapsing and being unable to interact might be a more adaptive response to the environment. So anyway, now on to the more severe one than that, and we're looking at collapsed immobility. This can happen suddenly or gradually. A sudden response is adults are often, or actually kids and teenagers are diagnosed with a vasovagal, a fainting response. I've also had a number of clients who thought they were narcoleptic or something of that sort and have gone through tests for that. Because it also can be collapsed immobility can be simply, I'm going along and I'm asleep or I faint. I have had both of those things happen in my office, though what I see more often is that as I'm talking to people and we're getting closer to talking about the abuse, all of a sudden, I see them start to nod and start to get sleepy. And it's very interesting, and I'll point it out. Interesting, not for them. Well, maybe for them. Part of my goal actually is to help people see it as interesting and to notice that if I shift the topic, they're alert again, right? And so it's very, very, and I'll say things like, okay, clearly your system is not ready to talk about this more. This is a sign that this is not feeling safe. And so we're going to pause on this and we're going to ground and we're going to talk about something that is less threatening. Yeah. Like tonic immobility, tonic is referred to the rigidity of the physical rigidity because you're still feeling that fear. Collapsed immobility, you're slumped. Your muscles are like limp almost, and you kind of nod forward or fall back. And what's happening physiologically, and this is actually kind of sad, but it does explain what is happening, is that your body is giving you a lot of natural opiates and pain receptors because this is the state that prey animal will go into just before death. And so nature's painkillers are being given to you. And so in this moment, you're not actively feeling fear, and you're also probably not feeling emotionally much at all. And you're also not able to think much at all. Mentally, you're hardly able to think. So it's not the same as tonic immobility, in which you might have a very clear idea of what's happening. As you go more into collapsed, you're not able to think and you don't feel your body. You don't feel any of the pain in your body. Um, and if you're an adult or teenager who has these episodes, um, of course, always get things medically checked out, but they can be very, very psychological. Just in the last few weeks, I helped someone that is an adult. I've worked with them for a long time, and suddenly, other than work, they were sleeping constantly. Like the second they got home, boom, sleeping, barely waking up for work. Weekends, sleeping all weekend. And they said, well, actually, as a child, I was tested for narcolepsy. Well, turns out it was very much that there were triggers in the environment, in their adult environment, that were causing this because this was kind of out of the blue. And actually, as soon as we kind of figured it out in therapy and talked with them, the sleeping episodes stopped just by identifying them and addressing the emotions that were experienced as unsafe, and therefore that sleep response kicked in. Um, and then that final paragraph down there, I think it's really important to address all involuntary submission responses really have a lot of shame with them. Like, especially if you're experiencing them, like in childhood when you really couldn't escape the bad situation is one thing, although I think kids may have shame too because they didn't have control, right? You don't have autonomy, you don't have control over your movements. But especially teenagers or adults, there can be a lot of shame with this. And or it can be thought of as just a medical condition, so it gets missed altogether. But yeah, I mean, this is especially if this happens to you during an act when somebody is actively abusing you, traumatizing you, attacking you, incredible amounts of shame. And I do a lot of education with people about how this is, the body's one way that the body protects you. And like I said at the beginning, submission responses are the responses of last resort, especially these last two. Last three, freeze, but certainly tonic and collapse, immobility. Involuntary submission happens only when nothing else is judged by your brain to be an adequate option to make things better. And I won't go in, that's a whole nother topic. You do not consciously decide to do an involuntary submission response, or frankly, any of these responses. A lot of them, all these different defenses I've been talking about, they're learned, and because they have been learned and your body and mind has learned them, they can be very automatic, especially as a teenager and an adult. Even when you're thinking, well, I didn't want to fawn in this, case. I didn't want to fight in this case. But they're learned young, and then your brain will extrapolate to situations that maybe you don't actually want to use that defense, but or maybe you feel shame about how you responded as a child as well. Many people do. But you do not choose your defenses. I mean, you can learn to have control and to regulate them with help from someone else and through research, your own research, but you don't choose those things. Um, and that's for another day. Polyvagal theory and neuroception. Neuroception, if you're interested. Okay, so I just wanted to say a little bit about DID, dissociative identity disorder, just because severe narcissistic abuse and neglect, it is not uncommon for that to create to create DID, which, by the way, is not mutually exclusive with narcissistic personality disorder or any number of other diagnoses. They can be very overlapping. And I will say, I don't know about all, but most of my clients who have a severe dissociative disorder like OSDD or DID have at least one parent who is highly dissociative as well. There tends to be intergenerational transmission of that, though not always. It's also possible, dissociation is a spectrum. You may have complex PTSD and dissociate, or you might have more severe than that is they call it other specified dissociative disorder, OSDD. And the most extreme one is DID out of those, and you can have any of those and also meet criteria for personality disorder. And all of those, you will also meet criteria at different points for PTSD. So when someone has DID, their defenses by nature are alternate and change. So all the defenses we've talked about, parts 4 through 8, you're probably going to have some of a lot of them. And at times, there's going to be internally, there are parts that are more prone to choosing certain kinds over others. And depending on how severe and complex the abuse and neglect was, the possible amount of parts is extremely high. However, there's going to be at least one part that at times fawns, at least one part that at times submits, at least one part that at times fights, and at least one part that at times, what's one I'm missing? Hmm, flees. I think flees and freezes. Um, the other thing with DID is that there's amnesia between those parts. So situations where somebody tells the child or teen or adult, oh, you did this, and they don't remember doing it. I mean, those things happen. Um, and always, even for complex PTSD, there's often trauma holding parts that the person does not have access to on a day to day. And those parts can very much impact why you're having very strong emotions or bodily sensations in day-to-day life, even if you aren't consciously linking those to something traumatic. Okay, so here's an example of the parts conflicting. Oh, it looks like my head is over fight part there. So for all people with DID, well, the worst it is basically if there's no route to safety, you basically have a cycling internal wheel of defenses that constantly shifts and is going back and forth, right? Or, maybe you have some parts that are fine in doing some parts of day-to-day life, but as soon as a threat is experienced, there are multi-layer responses happening among different parts internally. Um, and all of this is there is part of you that's trying to get that second part there, that with the arms up, that's the attached part, like, please, will you love me? If I'm perfect, if I'm good enough, will you love me? Please love me. But that doesn't work, right? Um, and so there's these different strategies. The first one is that submit part. You are right. You are perfect. You are powerful. Then there's the attached part. If I fawn, if I'm perfect, will you love me? I didn't put the fawn. Um, so we're going to add the fawn in. Imagine the fawn. Then you have the runner. What abuse? I don't know abuse. What mistakes? I don't know. I just want to smoke. I just want to eat. I just want to drink. And then the angry part that is hidden by my head. Oh, we talked about the inner critic. Oh, I screwed up. I messed up. I blah, blah, blah. And the critic, no, that person screwed up. That person messed up. That person, whatever. It's your fault. You're making me feel like crap. And then the freeze part, I should do something, but I can't do anything, but I need to do something, but nothing's safe. And so part of what you do in therapy is figure out what the heck happened inside between I was relatively fine and stable on a given day, and all of a sudden I want to die, or all of a sudden I'm binge eating, or all of a sudden I'm sleeping all the time, or all of a sudden I can't. Right. So the defense is, basically those are the things people come to therapy for, right? Like I'm a pleaser, I'm a people pleaser, or I think something bad happened, but I had trauma, or my relationships are bothering me, or I keep having these episodes where, I have an addiction, I'm having episodes of falling asleep or fainting. Doctors say it's not medical. I keep having panic attacks. I can't leave my house. I can't do this. I can't do that. These are the things that usually bring people into therapy rather than trauma per se. Hey, final reflections. Geez. So I've decided to put these 8 parts out as they are. I do have many things to say on, okay, once you understand this, what do you do with it? But I do think a huge part of dealing with this kind of things is just trying to understand what the heck is happening to you. Why are you responding the way you are? And so that's really the main purpose of this presentation. Um, I I'm thinking about what to share next, and I do want to put some tips both for therapists and for you, if this is you. Also, if you want me to make a video about something related to this, drop me an email, write, make a comment under the video, and we can look at that too. Okay, we've made it through part 8 of this presentation. Please keep an eye on the YouTube channel for other things coming out. I hope this is helpful for you. I welcome your thoughts, and like I said, if anyone wants me to comment on anything in particular, just let me know. And shout out to my counseling practice, Hope and Healing. And we're at hopeheal.org. And yeah, I guess that's it for now. I hope this is helpful. And goodbye.